Hong Kong, July 2016. Hundreds of the world's brightest young mathematicians had gathered at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology for the 57th International Mathematical Olympiad. Teams from 109 countries filled the dormitories, competition halls, and common areas of the campus. North Korea's 6-member team stayed in a monitored block under the constant supervision of handlers who watched every movement, every conversation, every step beyond the building's doors. On the 8th night of the competition, one student did not return to his room. An 18-year-old competitor, known for solving equations most university professors could not approach, walked out of the dormitory wearing the same clothes he had worn at dinner. He carried no passport, no phone, no identification, only a few bills hidden in his sock. The minders discovered his absence within minutes. North Korean officials began searching the campus. Chinese security services were alerted. If they found him before he reached safety, the outcome would be immediate and irreversible. But the student was not running from a crime. He was not fleeing punishment for something he had done. He was running from a future he had never chosen. His name was Ray Jong-yeol. He was one of the most gifted mathematical minds his country had ever produced. And in a city of 7 million people, he had approximately 3 hours to find the only door that could protect him from the system that had shaped his entire life. And this is the story of how he escaped. Ray Jong-yeol was born in 1998 in Pyeongsan, a city of approximately 280,000 people, located 30 kilometers north of Pyongyang. Pyeongsan was not an ordinary North Korean city. It served as the administrative center of South Pyongan Province and housed many of the country's scientific research institutions. The State Academy of Sciences maintained facilities there. Military research organizations operated in compounds throughout the area. The city was, in many ways, North Korea's intellectual capital. Ray's mathematical abilities manifested early. By the age of 8, he was solving problems that challenged students twice his age. His teachers recognized the anomaly immediately. In most educational systems, such a child might receive enrichment activities or advanced placement. In North Korea, the process was different. Gifted children in the DPRK are not simply talented individuals. They are state resources. The regime maintains an extensive identification system for exceptional youth. Teachers are required to report students who demonstrate unusual abilities in mathematics, science, languages, or other strategically valuable fields. These reports flow upward through the educational bureaucracy to central planning authorities who allocate human capital according to national priorities. Ray was flagged before he turned 10. By age 12, he had been transferred to one of Pyongyang's elite schools for mathematically gifted students. The institution operated under strict protocols. Students lived in dormitories. Contact with family was limited. The curriculum was intensive, focusing almost exclusively on mathematical theory and problem solving. The school served a dual purpose. Publicly, it prepared students for international academic competitions that showcased North Korean intellectual achievement. The regime valued the prestige these competitions provided, proof that its system could produce minds equal to those of wealthy capitalist nations. Privately, the school functioned as a pipeline. Students who excelled in mathematics were tracked toward specific assignments after graduation. Some would join research institutes working on weapon systems or industrial technology. Others would be directed to units whose existence the government did not publicly acknowledge. Ray excelled beyond anyone's expectations. In 2013, at age 15, he represented North Korea at the International Mathematical Olympiad in Colombia. He won a silver medal, an exceptional achievement for a first-time competitor. He returned in 2014, winning another silver, then again in 2015, then 2016. 4 consecutive silver medals established him as one of the most successful North Korean competitors in the Olympiad's history. International mathematical circles took notice. Here was a mind of genuine brilliance emerging from one of the world's most isolated nations. But for Ray, the competitions represented something else entirely. They were the only times he saw the world outside North Korea. The only times he encountered people who thought differently, lived differently, chose their own paths. The only times he glimpsed what existence looked like beyond the system that controlled every aspect of his life. Each competition ended the same way. The teen returned to Pyongyang. The students returned to their schools. The surveillance resumed. The future remained fixed. Ray was not just a competitor. He was an investment, and the state that had invested in him intended to determine exactly how that investment would be used. Understanding what Ray faced requires understanding how North Korea manages its most capable citizens. The regime operates on a principle of total allocation. Every person exists within a classification system that determines where they live, what work they perform, whom they can marry, and what privileges they receive. Mobility between classifications is rare. Deviation from assigned roles is dangerous. For ordinary citizens, this system is restrictive. For gifted individuals, it is absolute. Students identified as exceptional are separated from the general population early. They receive superior education, better food, access to resources unavailable to most North Koreans. These privileges are not gifts. They are investments that create obligations. A student who receives elite mathematical training does not graduate into an open job market. There is no job market. There are only assignments determined by state authorities based on institutional needs. The most common destinations for mathematical prodigies are known. Some are assigned to the State Academy of Sciences, where they work on theoretical problems with potential military applications. Others join research institutes focused on nuclear technology, missile guidance systems, or industrial automation. A significant number are directed toward a different kind of work entirely. North Korea maintains one of the world's most active cyber operations programs. Units like Bureau 121, operating under the Reconnaissance General Bureau, conduct hacking operations against foreign governments, financial institutions, and corporate targets. These operations generate revenue for the regime and serve intelligence-gathering purposes. Bureau 121 and similar units recruit exclusively from elite technical schools. Former defectors who worked in or adjacent to these programs have described the recruitment process. Students are not asked whether they wish to participate. They are informed of their assignments. Refusal is interpreted as disloyalty, a classification that affects not only the individual but their entire family. Ray understood where his path led. By 2015, he had begun to recognize the pattern. Classmates who graduated ahead of him disappeared into institutions they could not discuss. Friends from competition training stopped corresponding. The system that had elevated him was preparing to absorb him. His future was visible. He would graduate, he would receive an assignment, He would spend his life working on problems chosen by others in facilities he could not leave. Under supervision, he could not escape. He would never travel freely. He would never choose his own research. He would never have a thought that was entirely his own. The International Mathematical Olympiad in Hong Kong would be his last international trip before graduation. If he returned to Pyongyang with his team, the window would close permanently. He had won 4 silver medals for a country that would never let him decide how to use his own mind. The trip to Hong Kong was not just a competition, it was his only remaining chance. The North Korean delegation arrived at Hong Kong International Airport on July 6, 2016. The team consisted of 6 students and an unknown number of handlers. Adults whose official role was to supervise the competitors, but whose actual function was to prevent exactly what Ray was contemplating. Standard protocols govern North Korean travel delegations. Passports were held by officials, not individual team members. Students were forbidden from carrying personal identification. Communication devices were confiscated before departure. Contact with foreign nationals was monitored and restricted. The team was housed in dormitories at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, the competition venue. They occupied a designated block. Movement outside the block required escort. Interaction with competitors from other countries was permitted only in supervised settings. For most students at the Olympiad, the event was a celebration. Young mathematicians from around the world socialized freely. They exchanged contact information. They discussed problems. They formed friendships that would span continents. The dormitories buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. The North Korean team remained isolated. Ray observed the contrast. He watched competitors from South Korea, from Japan, from the United States and Europe move through the world with a freedom he had never experienced. They complained about minor inconveniences. They made plans for universities they would attend. They talked about futures they would choose. He had no such conversations. His future had been chosen for him. At some point during the week, the exact moment remains unknown. Ray made his decision. He would not return to Pyongyang. The decision was not impulsive. Ray had thought about defection before. Many North Koreans who eventually escaped describe years of internal deliberation before acting. The risks were not abstract. They were specific and severe. If he attempted to defect and failed, he would be repatriated immediately. North Korean security services would take custody of him. The punishment for attempted defection was imprisonment in a political labor camp, not just for the individual, but potentially for 3 generations of family. His parents, his siblings, his grandparents, all could be held accountable for his choice. Even if he succeeded, they would face consequences. The regime punished families of defectors as a deterrent. By escaping, Ray would be condemning people he loved to suffering he could not prevent. He understood this. He made his decision anyway. The obstacles were formidable. He had no passport. North Korean officials held all travel documents. Without identification, he could not board an aircraft, cross a border legally, or prove his identity to authorities. He had no contacts in Hong Kong, no network of sympathizers, no prearranged assistance. He did not know where the South Korean consulate was located. He did not know if South Korea would help him if he reached it. He had no guarantee that China would allow him to leave. Hong Kong was a special administrative region, but China controlled its foreign policy. Beijing maintained close relations with Pyongyang. Chinese authorities typically returned North Korean defectors rather than allowing them to reach South Korea. Ray had only one advantage. He was in a city where South Korea maintained a diplomatic presence. If he could reach that presence before anyone stopped him, he might survive. The closing ceremony of the 57th International Mathematical Olympiad took place on July 16, 2016. Ray had won his fourth consecutive silver medal. The North Korean team had performed well. The handlers were satisfied. Preparations began for the return flight to Pyongyang the following day. That evening, supervision intensified. The handlers understood that the final hours of any international trip represented the highest risk period. Students who harbored thoughts of escape would recognize that the window was closing. Vigilance was essential. Ray ate dinner with his team in the dormitory common area. He participated in conversation. He gave no indication that anything was different. After dinner, he returned to his room. He waited. The precise timeline of what followed has been reconstructed from multiple sources, though exact times vary. At approximately 8:00 p.m., Ray left his room. He walked through the dormitory corridors with deliberate normalcy. He did not rush. He did not carry a bag. He wore the same clothes he had worn at dinner. In his sock, he had hidden approximately 200 Hong Kong dollars, roughly $25 US that he had managed to obtain during the trip. He exited through a side door and stepped into the warm Hong Kong evening. The campus of HKUST sits on a hillside overlooking Clearwater Bay. The main gate was monitored. Ray moved toward a secondary exit following paths he had memorized during the week. He reached the perimeter without interception. Outside the campus, he located a taxi stand. He approached a driver and spoke in careful English, a language he had studied in preparation for exactly this moment. He asked to be taken to Hong Kong International Airport. The request was strategic. Ray knew he could not board a flight without a passport, but he also knew that airports were hubs of international activity. He believed the South Korean consulate might have a presence there, or that someone could direct him to it. The taxi ride took approximately 45 minutes. At the airport, Ray approached an information counter. He asked in English where he could find the South Korean government office. The staff member explained that the consulate was located in Central District on Hong Kong Island, not at the airport. The staff provided directions. Ray returned to the taxi queue. He had little money remaining. The fare to Central would consume nearly everything. He paid the driver and stepped out at the Far East Finance Center, a commercial tower in the heart of Hong Kong's financial district. The South Korean Consulate General occupied space on an upper floor. Ray entered the building. He located the consulate entrance. He approached the security desk. What he said was recorded in diplomatic communications that remain partially classified. The essence was simple. He identified himself as a citizen of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. He stated that he wished to seek asylum in the Republic of Korea. He requested protection. The staff recognized immediately what was happening. Within minutes, Ray was moved to a secure room inside the consulate. The door closed behind him. He had been outside North Korean control for approximately 3 hours. The disappearance of Ri Jong-yul triggered immediate response. Handlers at the HKUST dormitory discovered his absence during a routine check. They searched the building. They searched the campus. They contacted North Korean diplomatic officials in Hong Kong. Within hours, the DPRK mission had alerted Chinese authorities that a member of their delegation had gone missing. The description was specific: an 18-year-old male. Possible defection attempt. National security implications. Chinese security services began their own search. But Ray was no longer in public space. He was inside the South Korean consulate on sovereign diplomatic territory that Chinese authorities could not enter without permission. The situation became a diplomatic standoff. North Korean officials demanded access to Ray. They claimed he was a minor suffering from psychological disturbance, that he needed to be returned to his delegation for medical evaluation. They insisted the South Korean government had no right to harbor a DPRK citizen. South Korea refused. Under international law, a person who reaches a diplomatic mission and requests asylum is entitled to consideration of their claim. The consulate was not obligated to surrender Ray simply because his government demanded it. But South Korea faced its own constraints. The consulate could protect Ray inside its walls. It could not transport him to Seoul without Chinese cooperation. Hong Kong was Chinese territory. Any movement of Ray outside the consulate required approval from Beijing. China's position was delicate. The People's Republic maintained a policy of returning North Korean defectors who were apprehended on Chinese soil. This policy served Beijing's strategic relationship with Pyongyang and discouraged the flow of refugees across the Chinese-North Korean border. But Ray had not been apprehended. He had reached a foreign diplomatic mission voluntarily. Forcing South Korea to surrender him would create international incident. Allowing him to leave would anger Pyongyang. The negotiations proceeded through classified channels. Ray remained inside the consulate. He could not leave the building. He could not communicate with the outside world. He existed in a liminal space, legally protected but physically trapped. Days passed, then weeks. The North Korean delegation returned to Pyongyang without him. Official DPRK media made no mention of his disappearance. The regime's public position was silence. Behind closed doors, diplomatic pressure intensified. South Korean officials argued that Ray had made a voluntary choice to seek asylum. International human rights principles supported his right to do so. Forcing his return would violate norms that China claimed to respect. Chinese officials weighed their options. The standoff continued for approximately 70 days. During this period, Ray lived in the consulate. He slept in temporary quarters. He ate meals prepared by staff. He had no contact with his family, no knowledge of what was happening outside, no certainty about his future. He waited. In late September 2016, China quietly approved his departure. The decision was not announced publicly. No press conference was held. The diplomatic resolution remained confidential. South Korean officials issued Ray emergency travel documents. He was escorted to Hong Kong International Airport under diplomatic protection. He boarded a flight to Seoul. The aircraft lifted off from the runway where 3 months earlier he had arrived as a member of the North Korean national team. He was not the same person who had landed. Ray Jong-yeol arrived in Seoul in late September 2016. South Korean authorities assigned him a new legal identity. The name released to the public was Lee Jung-ho, a common Korean name that would allow him to move through society without immediate identification as a defector. He entered the standard resettlement process that South Korea provides to North Korean refugees. The process includes orientation to South Korean society, psychological evaluation, vocational assessment, and initial housing support. Defectors receive a settlement payment and access to education and employment assistance programs. For Ray, the transition presented unique challenges. He had spent his entire life in a system designed to prevent independent thought. Every decision had been made for him. Every activity had been supervised. The concept of choosing his own path, where to live, what to study, how to spend his time, was foreign to his experience. He also carried knowledge that made him valuable. South Korean intelligence services debriefed him extensively. A mathematical prodigy who had been educated in North Korea's elite institutions possessed insights into the regime's technical capabilities, educational methods, and talent identification systems. The specific contents of these debriefings remain classified. What is known is that Ray chose to continue his mathematical education. He enrolled in a South Korean university under his new name. He pursued advanced studies in the field that had defined his life since childhood. But now the work was his own. The problems he solved were problems he chose. The future he built was a future he determined. He declined media interviews. He avoided public attention. He had no interest in becoming a symbol or a spokesperson. He wanted only what he had risked everything to obtain: the ability to live according to his own decisions. The impact of his defection extended beyond his personal story. North Korea withdrew from the International Mathematical Olympiad for 2 years following Ray's escape. The regime offered no official explanation. Observers interpreted the withdrawal as a response to the security failure that had allowed one of its most prized students to disappear. When North Korea returned to competition in 2019, new protocols were evident. Supervision had intensified. The margin for independent action had narrowed. International attention focused on the implications of Ray's case. Human rights organizations cited his escape as evidence of the coercive systems North Korea applied to its most talented citizens. Academic researchers examined what his trajectory revealed about the regime's technical education programs and their connection to military and cyber capabilities. For the international mathematical community, the case raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of competitions that included participants from closed societies. Young people who had no choice about representing their governments, no freedom to interact with peers, no ability to pursue opportunities their talents might otherwise provide. Ray had answered the question for himself. Ray Jong-yeol walked out of a dormitory in Hong Kong on a July evening in 2016 with no passport, no phone, and no guarantee that anyone would help him. He crossed a city of 7 million people using a language he barely spoke, searching for a building he had never seen, hoping that the government inside would choose to protect him. He spent 70 days in a room he could not leave, waiting to learn whether he would be sent back to the system that had claimed ownership of his mind since childhood. He emerged into a country where, for the first time, the decisions were his own. The regime that had identified him as a resource, educated him as an investment, and planned to assign him as a tool never acknowledged what it had lost. Official North Korean records contain no mention of Ray Jong-yeol's defection. In the state's narrative, he simply ceased to exist. But in Seoul, under a different name, a young mathematician continued his work. The problems he solves now are problems he chooses. The research he pursues follows directions he determines. The life he builds belongs to him. He was not running from punishment in that Hong Kong dormitory. He was running from a future in which his extraordinary mind would be used for purposes he could not question, by authorities he could not challenge, in a system he could never leave. For the first time in 18 years, he chose the outcome himself.